So this is a crochet tutorial for a recent commission that I did for an acquaintance who is a fan of zerobaseone, the K-pop group. I have included diagrams and written instructions, and I will also paste those in the description below. The pattern is something that I made myself based on a reference photo that she sent me, and usually I crochet freestyle, so I put the pattern together after I had finished the project. The yarn was some 4-ply milk cotton yarn that I got from Shopee, and for the crochet hook I used a size 3.0. My acquaintance sent me some measurements. What was important was the diameters of the head and the circumference of the head and the circumference of the neck. This is the diagram in its entirety, and one important thing to note is that you shouldn't be closing off any rows, so your entire piece should be done in a continuous spiral to prevent any of those ugly markings on the outside when you slip stitch and then you chain one. The first 2 rows are pretty conventional. You begin with a magic ring of 6 single crochets. If you don't know how to do a magic ring, there are ways around it and also many other tutorials out there for it. And after you complete your first row of 6 single crochets, you increase normally. So from 6 stitches to 12 stitches, you just put 2 single crochets in each of the 6 loops and you get 12 stitches in total. For the next few rows, the increases are all going to be on 2 opposite ends so as to force the piece into an oval shape. But because of the nature of this piece, you're not going to end up smack in the center every single time you end a row, so you really need to count your stitches and make sure that you are making the piece symmetrical. In the diagram, I've indicated on which stitches from the previous row the current row's increases should be built on top of, and I've also numbered the stitches so you can count as you are crocheting. How I count is like 1, 2, 3, increase, 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 1, 2, 3, increase, 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 end of row. From row 4 onwards, I've drawn a pink line to indicate the start of each row because it's not the same for every row anymore. And so for this row, you should be counting like 1, 2, 3, 4, increase, 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 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, increase, 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 1, 2. So on opposite ends, you have 6 stitches each. For row 5, you should have 9 stitches each on the opposite ends. So for the non-increase stitches, each row increases by 3. And the reason for this, as you can see in the diagram, is that every time we increase, we only use 3 stitches to increase to 6 on either side, which then leaves 3 stitches which are untouched and will become the so-called normal stitches for the next row. Row 6 should have 12 stitches on opposite ends on the top and the bottom of the oval. And the oval shape should be getting quite obvious by now. You can open up the piece and see if you can spot the lines of symmetry. Row 7 is the last shaping row for this piece. Afterwards, it's just normal increases to increase the size, but we are no longer making the oval more oval. And as usual, it's a good practice to count your stitches and make sure that you have the correct number of stitches. So for row 7, you should have 42 stitches in total, and for the non-increase stitches, you should have 15 single crochets on each side. This diagram shows where the increases are done if you need it. And now for rows 8 to 10, the next 3 rows, the goal is just to increase the size evenly throughout in order to meet those measurements of the doll. When you've reached the maximum circumference of 54 stitches, you need to do a couple more rows of 54 stitches because the doll's head is actually not as flat as it looks in the photo. Like from the top, when you look down, the head is, according to the measurement my friend gave me, about 5.5 cm in terms of thickness. You know, from like say the nose of the doll to the back of the head of the doll. So you have to create that kind of space. Row 11 is where things get very, very, very interesting. So you do one more row of 54 single crochets, and then after that you need to use what I call eye power, which means you need to use your eyes and determine for yourself where the lines of symmetry are. The important line of symmetry is the longest diameter that bisects the oval into a top and a bottom. The neck gap is 13 stitches wide, so you then need to make sure that the 7 stitches on either side of the gap that you're going to leave are going to make the oval symmetrical. So you undo the stitches until you make sure that 13 stitch gap is in the center. For me, when I did it, I removed about 7 stitches. Yeah, when I removed 7 stitches, the 13 stitch gap became centralized for me. But you really need to use your eyes and determine that for yourself. Next, we're going to flip it around and put in 2 rows to create the space for the side of the head. The goal here is to make sure that there is enough depth for the doll's neck to fit through, and also your doll's head is going to have to squeeze through that little gap when you are putting it on. So remember to count to make sure that you are leaving a 13 stitch gap for the doll's neck to fit through later. Flip it around and do the second row of 41 single crochets. When you are done, the gap that you left for the neck, the 13 stitch gap, should be very prominent and obvious to you by then. Like there should be 2 points on either side. And now what you need to do is you need to connect these 2 points to recreate the oval. So you chain 13 and then you prepare to start the next row on the other side. So you just insert your hook first into that point and then you start counting for the next row. In the next 2 rows, you are going to decrease normally. So you are going to decrease by 6 stitches, and those 6 stitches are going to be evenly distributed across the round. How I count it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 decrease, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 decrease. At the chain part, there's nothing to decrease, so instead of decreasing, you just put in a normal single crochet. I also prefer to have my stitches wrap around the chain instead of, inserting into the chain, because I think that it looks a bit neater that way. For row 15, you just decrease another 6 more stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, decrease, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, decrease, and you should end up with 42 stitches. At this point, because of all the decreases that you made, your piece might look like there are corners, it looks a bit like a wobbly hexagon of sorts. So what you do is you slip stitch to sort of try to cover up those little corners and make the hood part look rounder after it's been put on the doll. And when you're done, do it all again because you need 2 of these cherry bodies. Okay, now we're going to do the cherry stem, so you're going to need bright green yarn for this. The technique that we're going to be using for the cherry stem is called an I-cord, so we're going to be making a green I-cord to connect the 2 cherry heads. To save the effort of having to connect one end later, you just loop it through from the very start and then you make your I-cord from that moment. So you only need to connect it to the other hat later on. If you don't know how to make an I-cord, there are many tutorials out there for it as well. But the basic idea is that you are using both the tail and the feet. So the tail goes from front to back over the hook, and then the feet goes from back to front over the hook, and then you pull that through both loops. And what you do is then you create a sort of like a double layered cord. This is also something that you do if you knit, which I do, but I prefer crochet. I think crochet is a lot easier. And one common mistake for making an I-cord is that you underestimate how much tail you need. So you need to make sure that your tail is long enough for you to create the length that you want. And when you're done with the stem, you just connect it to the top of your second cherry hat. And then you tie a little bow. You can even secure the bow in place by sewing through the knot. And that's it, you're done. I hope this has been helpful, and please show me if you do try this out. Thank you.